The last thing I saw in 2032 was my own name disappearing from the company lobby. For 19 years, I had built Asterion from a rented room into one of the largest technology companies on the planet. I designed its first adaptive processor. I slept beneath my desk during the launch of its cloud network. When our first factory caught fire, I carried hard drives through smoke while the executives who later called themselves founders watched from the parking lot. None of that mattered when the boardroom doors closed. Victor sat at the head of the table in the chair that had once belonged to me. His silver tie was perfectly straight. Behind him, the city shone through 40 floors of rain, and the wall display showed Asterion's valuation in numbers large enough to look unreal. The company was worth $200 billion. I owned less than 1% after years of desperate funding rounds, emergency loans, and signatures I had made to keep the machines running. Victor owned the votes. He slid a folder toward me. My title was gone. My laboratory access had already been disabled. The apartment guaranteed by the company would be reclaimed by midnight, and the medical debt from my wife's final years still belonged to me. Even my private patents had been folded into Asterion through agreements I had signed when survival mattered more than control. He told me I should be proud. That was the part one remembered most clearly. I looked through the glass wall at the engineers still working in the laboratory below. The central machine on their table was my final project, an offline predictive intelligence trained on 23 years of financial records, product launches, patents, manufacturing failures, and corporate collapses. It was designed to remember patterns after the world lost access to its networks. Victor called it Lumen when investors were watching. In private, he called it another asset. Security escorted me out with one cardboard box. The lobby screen changed while I crossed the marble floor. My photograph vanished from the founder's history. Victor's portrait expanded to fill the space, smiling above the sentence that announced a bold new era. The receptionist who had greeted me for 12 years stared at her desk. Outside, the rain was cold enough to hurt. My bank account contained $17. My company badge no longer opened the subway gate. I walked because there was nowhere worth paying to reach. At some point, I realized the matte black Lumen prototype was in my box. It was smaller than my palm, with one cracked strip of blue light across its face. I must have taken it from the laboratory without thinking, or perhaps someone had placed it there. The battery symbol showed 2%, but when I pressed the edge, a quiet voice said my name. Then a delivery truck turned through a red light. There was white paint, the scream of brakes, and the strange thought that Victor would list the prototype as missing before he listed me as dead. I opened my eyes beneath a ceiling covered in glow-in-the-dark stars. For several seconds, I believed the hospital had chosen an insulting decoration. Then an alarm clock began ringing beside my head. It was a cheap plastic thing with red digits. The date beneath the time read October 14th, 2009. I sat up too quickly and struck the shelf above my childhood bed. A stack of school books hit the floor. My hands were thinner. The scar across my left thumb, earned during Asterion's first factory fire, was gone. On the wall, a college acceptance letter waited beneath a faded basketball schedule. My mother had kept this room exactly this way until she sold the house in 2016. Except in 2009, she had not sold anything yet. I reached for the mirror. An 18-year-old face stared back at me, pale with shock, black hair crushed on one side, gray eyes too old for everything around them. The matte black device lay on my chest. Its blue strip flickered once. Lumen told me that a severe temporal displacement had occurred. The phrase was absurd, but the date on my alarm clock, the old phone on my desk, and my unscarred hands all agreed with it. I asked how much power remained. 30 days, Lumen answered. The collision had damaged its permanent cell. It could survive 30 days under minimal use, less if forced to reconstruct corrupted parts of its archive. It could not connect to 2009 networks because its radio hardware had burned out. It could not manufacture a replacement cell. If the battery died before I transferred its core into compatible servers, the only machine that remembered the next 23 years would become a black piece of glass. I should have been terrified. Instead, I started laughing. In my first life, I had needed permission for everything. Permission from investors to hire, permission from banks to buy machines, permission from Victor to enter the laboratory I had designed. I had died with $17 while the company made from my sleepless years removed my name from a wall. Now I was 18. My mother was alive downstairs. The market crash that had crushed our savings was happening outside. Victor had never met me. Asterion did not exist. And the future was sitting in my hand. Lumen warned me that its archive was damaged. Most daily records could not be trusted. It had recovered 7 sealed opportunity packets with confidence above 99%. Each packet could be opened once. Reconstruction would consume power, and the knowledge inside would become less useful as my choices changed history. That was enough. I did not need every winning trade until 2032. I needed the first door. The first packet was marked for that afternoon. Selene Networks was a forgotten communications company whose shares had collapsed during the fictional Red Monday crash. In my first life, I had heard old traders tell the story like a legend. At 2:45 that afternoon, an emergency government contract would be announced. The shares would reverse so violently that anyone positioned before the announcement would make a fortune. Lumen showed me the critical facts, then the packet sealed itself. Price at entry, 8 cents. Reversal time, 2:45. Peak exit window, 3:51 to 3:55. I checked my teenage bank account. $80.14. My mother called from the kitchen that I would miss class. I went downstairs and stopped when I saw her. In 2032, I could barely remember the exact sound of her voice. She was standing beside the stove in a blue diner uniform, packing toast into a paper napkin because she had worked the early shift and still believed I needed breakfast before school. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to warn her about the mortgage, the illness she had hidden, and the winter she would spend choosing between heat and medication. Instead, I hugged her so suddenly that she dropped the napkin. She touched my forehead and asked whether I had a fever. I told her I had remembered something important. Then I took the bus downtown. The small brokerage office near the station looked exactly like a room history had forgotten. 3 televisions hung from the ceiling. Red numbers rolled across the bottom of the screens. Adults in loosened ties argued into folding phones while a printer spat paper beside a water cooler. The market had been falling for days, and the room smelled of burnt coffee and panic. The clerk behind the counter looked from my old jacket to the $80 in my hand. He explained that this was not an arcade. I told him I wanted every cent placed on Selene Networks. He checked the ticker twice. Then he asked whether my father had sent me. I said no. A broad man beside the counter heard the company name and laughed into his coffee. Selene was finished. Its lenders were preparing to seize the towers. He advised me to keep the cash for lunch. I did not argue. I filled out the form, paid the fee, and watched the account appear on a beige monitor. After costs, I controlled 970 shares. The number looked painfully small. At noon, Selene fell to 7 cents. At 1, it touched 6. The clerk glanced at me as if waiting for tears. The broad man announced each drop to the room. My $80 became 68, then 58. In my first life, numbers on a screen had controlled whether thousands of employees kept their jobs. That day, the only number that mattered was the clock. Lumen remained inside my jacket, warm against my ribs. Every few minutes, its damaged cell gave a faint pulse. I asked whether the timing remained valid. It answered that history had not yet diverged. At 2:40, the broad man offered to buy me a sandwich after I lost the rest. I told him the cell wall would vanish in 5 minutes. He looked up at the screen. At 2:44, nothing happened. The clerk folded his arms. Someone turned down the television. I could feel the old fear crawling up my spine, the fear of being the only person in a room who had committed everything, while men with clean shirts waited for me to fail. At 2:45, one of the news anchors pressed a hand to his earpiece. The emergency contract appeared beneath him in yellow letters. For one silent second, Selene's price did not move. Then the orders holding it down disappeared. The chart jumped from 6 cents to 30. A man near the printer knocked over his chair. By 2:49, it crossed $1. Phones rose around the room. The broad man stopped drinking with the cup touching his lower lip. My 970 shares were worth more than the amount my mother earned in half a year. But I did not sell. The clerk leaned toward me and suggested taking the profit. I watched the clock. At 3 o'clock, Selene crossed $5. At 3:30, it crossed 19. Each movement transformed my future. Rent, medicine, servers, a laboratory. Yet Lumen had not given me the first safe exit. It had given me the peak. At 3:50, the office was packed. People had come in from the street after seeing the news. The broad man had bought near $16 and was telling everyone the price would reach 100. The clerk no longer looked at my jacket. He stood beside my monitor, waiting for my decision. At 3:53, the price touched $42. I sold everything. The confirmation appeared with a balance of $40,764. No one said anything for several seconds. The broad man slowly lowered his phone. The clerk printed the receipt, checked it, printed it again, and placed both copies in front of me with 2 hands. I had entered with $80. Before the closing bell, I walked out with more than $40,000. It was not enough to preserve Lumen. It was not enough to buy a company or a factory, but it was the first money I had ever owned without begging an investor or signing away part of my future. I spent the first $12 on a taxi. The driver asked where I wanted to go. I gave him the address of a computer warehouse across the city. In 2009, $12,000 could buy enough server equipment to make my bedroom floor complain. It could also attract questions from my mother, so I rented a narrow garage behind a closed print shop and paid 6 months in advance. The property manager looked at my age and asked for a guarantor. I placed the lease payment on his desk. He stopped asking. By evening, a delivery truck carried 3 used servers, batteries, cooling fans, cables, and a workbench into the garage. The salesman kept directing questions to the property manager until I added a diagnostic unit and paid the full bill from my new account. Then he handed the warranty folder to me. The servers were primitive compared with anything inside Lumen, but I did not need them to run the AI yet. I needed to learn what bridge hardware had to exist between them. Lumen projected a simple diagram across the workbench. The future device contained materials no 2009 manufacturer could reproduce. Direct disassembly would destroy it. To transfer the core, I needed a custom power controller, a clean environment, and a server array large enough to receive a compressed model built for hardware that had not been invented. Estimated cost, several $1,000,000. Estimated time, 29 days and 13 hours. My $40,000 suddenly looked like pocket change. I asked Lumen to open the second opportunity packet. Its blue strip dimmed. Battery life fell by 11 hours. Arcadia Mobile, one of the largest device companies in the country, had announced a public emergency bounty. Its new pocket computer overheated whenever the wireless chip and bright display ran together. The product launch was 48 hours away. Hundreds of engineers had failed to solve it without reducing performance. Arcadia promised $500,000 to anyone who could provide a working fix. Lumen contained the patent history of the solution that Arcadia itself would discover 2 years later. There was one problem. The fix required a controller board I could not build with tools from a computer warehouse. I needed someone who understood the ugly physical side of electronics, someone willing to believe an 18-year-old with cash and impossible diagrams. Lumen gave me an address. At midnight, I found a 24-hour repair shop squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop. Half the sign was dark. Inside, discarded televisions and radios formed towers around a young man with copper wire wrapped around one wrist. He had a soldering iron in one hand and an eviction notice beneath the other. His name was Ethan. In my first life, Ethan had designed the power architecture that made modern wearable computers possible. Adrian had bought his patents for almost nothing after every major company rejected him. Victor later presented those designs as evidence of his own vision. Ethan left the industry before he was 30. In 2009, he was 24, broke, and arguing with a customer who refused to pay $20 for a repaired radio. I waited until the customer left. Then I placed $5,000 on the counter. Ethan stared at the money, then at me. He asked what I wanted repaired. I placed Lumen's controller diagram beside the cash. I told him I did not want a radio repaired. I wanted him to build something the world's largest device company could not. He studied the diagram for less than a minute before turning the shop sign from open to closed. That was when I knew the second opportunity was not really a bounty. It was the first employee of my future empire. Ethan did not touch the money first. He touched the diagram. His repair shop had one working lamp, a fan that clicked on every rotation, and enough discarded circuit boards to cover the walls. Yet he read Lumen's controller design as if the clean white page were a map to buried treasure. He traced the power channels with a stained finger, crossed out one component, and replaced it with 3 parts that actually existed in 2009. Then he asked who had designed it. I told him I had. That was not completely true, but it was closer to the truth than explaining that he would help invent the same architecture 12 years later in another life. Ethan finally looked at the $5,000. His landlord wanted 3 months of rent by morning. The large device companies had rejected his applications because he had no degree, and the small repair jobs barely covered electricity. He asked whether the money was payment or bait. I told him it was the first week's budget. If his board worked, the next number would have 6 zeros. He locked the cash in an empty radio case and followed me to the garage. We worked until sunrise. I gave him only the pieces of Lumen's design he needed. He replaced components the future diagram assumed existed, built a crude heatsink from a copper serving tray, and complained that my servers belonged in a museum. I reminded him that in 2009 they were nearly new. He asked why I spoke about the year as if I were visiting it. I changed the subject. By noon, the controller board was running. It drew power away from the hottest parts of Arcadia's device without slowing the display or wireless chip. We did not own an Arcadia prototype, so Ethan recreated the load across a row of salvaged parts. The temperature fell by 14 degrees. Lumen confirmed the result, but using it for analysis cost another 3 hours of battery. We had 28 days left. Arcadia Mobile's headquarters occupied a mirrored tower downtown. Hundreds of engineers and vendors were arriving for the bounty demonstration, each carrying polished cases and printed credentials. Ethan carried our board in the same metal toolbox he used for broken radios. I carried 1 page of test results. The woman at registration was professional rather than rude. She read the form, saw that neither of us represented a company, and explained that independent submissions had closed that morning. Arcadia had already selected 5 corporate teams for the final test. I asked whether the product president knew the phone would burn a reviewer's hand at 4:10 that afternoon. The woman paused. That detail had not been made public. Lumen's archive included the failed launch report, down to the minute a test unit overheated beneath studio lights. She called a manager. The manager called security first, and an engineer second. The engineer arrived with tired eyes and the expression of someone who had not slept in a week. His name was Caleb, and he was not impressed by my age or Ethan's toolbox. He was impressed when Ethan connected our controller to a test platform, and the temperature graph dropped in front of him. Caleb closed the laboratory door. The 5 corporate teams had offered software patches that dimmed the screen, slowed the wireless connection, or both. Arcadia could ship a bad product or cancel a launch worth hundreds of millions. Our board fixed the heat without changing what customers saw. Caleb asked for the design files. I asked for a meeting with the president. An hour later, we were in a conference room above the city. Arcadia's president did not waste time insulting us. He placed the bounty agreement on the table and offered the advertised $500,000 after verification. He also offered me a place in Arcadia's engineering program, a salary that would have made every teacher at my school proud, and tuition at any university I chose. In my first life, I would have accepted before he finished speaking. A prestigious company name had once looked like safety. I turned the employment offer face down. The bounty bought 1 server rack. Ownership could buy a factory. I explained that the controller solved more than 1 overheating product. Arcadia could pay $600,000 immediately for the emergency fix and license the architecture across its next generation of devices for another $3,400,000. If it refused, I would claim the public bounty and take the broader design to its competitors after the launch. The lawyers entered. The president stopped speaking to me like a student. He asked how an 18-year-old had built something his entire division missed. I told him that was not part of the license. At 4:10, a test phone without our board overheated beneath the studio lamps exactly as I had predicted. Caleb placed our modified unit beside it. The second phone stayed cool. The president watched both temperature lines, closed the employment folder, and told the lawyers to prepare my license. The first payment reached my account before sunset, $600,000. Ethan stared at the notification until the screen dimmed. Then he asked whether the promised 60 number belonged to both of us. I transferred $50,000 into his new account and told him it was his signing bonus. He sat down on the conference room floor. The Arcadia executives pretended not to notice, which was the politest thing they could have done. The larger payment arrived after the launch succeeded. $3,400,000 appeared beside the first transfer, making my total receipts $4 million. After equipment, rent, Ethan's bonus, and ordinary costs, I controlled a little under $4 million in cash. That number should have felt enormous. My mother could stop working before dawn. I could buy the house and every house beside it. Instead, Lumen's battery indicator turned yellow. 26 days remained. Success had attracted attention. Arcadia's president came to our garage the next morning with 2 executives in a black car that barely fit in the alley. He wanted an exclusive agreement for whatever we built next. The property manager saw powerful adults waiting outside my dented metal door and began calling me sir. I served the executives coffee from paper cups and refused exclusivity. The president increased the offer twice. Ethan nearly dropped the sugar when the number reached $10 million. I still refused. $10 million would make me comfortable. Exclusive control would let Arcadia decide what I was allowed to become. When the executives left, Ethan asked whether I was secretly insane. I showed him the preservation requirements, not Lumen itself. I described the device as a damaged research core containing designs worth more than Arcadia. We needed a clean room, stable industrial power, custom fabrication tools, and a server hall. Buying those pieces separately would take longer than the battery could survive. But Lumen's third opportunity packet identified a place where all of them already existed. Hartwell Electronics had once manufactured control boards for medical equipment. The crash destroyed its orders. Its owner declared bankruptcy, the workers were sent home, and an auction company planned to divide the property into scrap. The public listing valued the old machines at less than the land. The forgotten clean room beneath the east wing was different. It had been built for a government contract that never started. Its air system, microfabrication tools, and isolated power grid were exactly what we needed. The whole company could be purchased for about $3 million. The auction closed in 3 days. Ethan looked around our rented garage. A delivery of new server cabinets blocked half the door. Arcadia's test device sat on the workbench beside tools from his failed repair shop. 3 days earlier, neither of us could have paid the shop's rent. Now I was talking about buying a factory. He asked whether I had ever considered doing anything at a normal speed. I told him normal speed had killed me once. Before visiting Hartwell, I went home. My mother had found the brokerage receipt in my jacket and spent the evening believing it was a prank. I placed the mortgage statement beside my bank notification and paid the overdue amount for my phone. Then I transferred enough money to cover the house completely. She sat at the kitchen table without speaking. I did not explain Lumen or the future. I told her I had made money from a technology design and that she no longer needed the diner shift. She checked the payment confirmation 3 times. Then she asked whether the money was legal. I laughed harder than the question deserved. After the life I had lived, a clean license payment felt almost suspicious. She did not quit her job that day. She did agree to stop taking double shifts. That was enough for now. I bought 2 plain black jackets, a better phone, and a used sedan because taxis wasted time. The car salesman tried to steer me toward financing until the payment cleared in full. I did not buy anything flashy. My first real luxury was arriving when I chose. Hartwell Electronics stood on the edge of the city behind a rusted fence. The main building stretched across several blocks, its windows dark and its loading bays chained. Rainwater reflected a faded blue company sign. An auction banner hung beneath it like a surrender flag. Several buyers toured the property with clipboards. Most cared about copper, land, and machines they could move elsewhere. I recognized Victor before he recognized me. He was 26, younger and hungrier than the man who had removed me from Asterion. His suit was cheaper, his smile less controlled. He represented Titan Holdings, a growing acquisition firm whose technology division would become Titan Mobile. In my first life, Victor had told everyone we met at a university laboratory. That was a lie. We met in a bankrupt factory where he tried to buy my future as scrap. He looked at Ethan's toolbox and assumed we were repair contractors. He handed us a list of machines his team wanted inspected. I folded the list and placed it back in his pocket. He looked at me then. Before he could ask who I was, a woman in a gray work coat crossed the silent production floor. She moved quickly, carrying keys, auction documents, and the exhaustion of someone doing 6 jobs because everyone else had left. Her name was Maya. She had designed Hartwell's production software, managed its final months, and spent the last week trying to keep buyers from destroying machines that could still run. In my first life, Maya became the operating mind behind Titan's most profitable device platform. Victor took public credit for every launch. She resigned after he blamed her for a failure his own deadline caused. In 2009, she looked at my 18-year-old face and asked which buyer had sent me. I told her I was the buyer. Victor heard me and laughed. He explained that the auction was for industrial bidders, not teenagers who had made one lucky trade. He already knew about Selene. News moved quickly in rooms where money gathered. Maya did not laugh. She asked what I wanted to see. I told her to show me the part of the factory no one else understood. Her eyes moved toward the sealed stairs beneath the east wing. That was how she became the first person at Hartwell to realize I was not there for scrap. And when she unlocked the forgotten clean room, Lumen's blue strip brightened beneath my jacket for the first time since I woke. The clean room had been sealed for 4 years. Maya turned 3 keys before the steel door released. Dust covered the corridor outside, but the room beyond remained white and still. Fabrication tables stood beneath plastic sheets. A row of precision cutters waited behind glass. The isolated power controls used physical switches, not software tied to Hartwell's dead office network. To the auction buyers, the room was obsolete. To Lumen, it was the missing bridge between 2032 and 2009. The blue light beneath my jacket pulsed against my chest. Estimated compatibility rose from 12% to 68%. With modifications, Ethan could build the interface. With enough servers, the room could receive Lumen's compressed core. I asked Maya why the clean room was absent from the main auction sheet. Hartwell had built it for a medical contract that disappeared after a government budget change. The owner sealed the wing to save operating costs, then borrowed against newer equipment elsewhere. The auction company cared about items with recent paperwork. Maya had tried to explain the room's value, but no buyer wanted to restart an untested line during a crash. I wanted it running within a week. Maya studied me carefully. She did not ask whether I could pay. She asked what I planned to manufacture. I told her the first product would be a future. That answer should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, she removed the plastic from the nearest machine and showed Ethan the control cabinet. Victor appeared in the doorway with 2 auction representatives. He had finally learned that Arcadia paid me for the power design. His manner changed, but not enough. He congratulated me on the bounty and said young engineers often confused one successful invention with the ability to operate a company. Then he offered to hire Ethan. Ethan looked behind himself as if Victor must be speaking to someone else. 3 days earlier, no corporation would interview him. Now Titan wanted him because Victor had seen one working board. I asked Victor what salary he offered. He named $80,000 a year. I asked Ethan what his signing bonus had been. Ethan answered $50,000. Victor's representative stopped writing. Maya turned away, but I saw the corner of her mouth move. Victor recovered quickly. He said a teenager could spend a lucky payment once, but payroll arrived every month. He intended to buy Hartwell's useful machines, move them to Titan's contractors, and let the old building become storage. If I tried to compete for the equipment, he would make sure I paid more than it was worth. I was not competing for equipment. I asked Maya for the whole company price. The auction representatives began explaining separate lots. I repeated the question. Land, buildings, remaining machines, inventory, name, contracts, and the obligations needed to bring the workers back. What did it cost to stop the breakup entirely? One representative made a call. The bankruptcy administrator wanted $3,200,000 with proof of funds before the next afternoon. The price frightened away buyers because the factory had no active orders. Victor's plan would recover the best equipment for less than $1 million. I told them I would pay the full price. Victor laughed again, but this time he watched my face while doing it. He knew Arcadia's public bounty was only $500,000. He did not know about the broader license. The auction representative requested proof. I opened my account and showed him enough to complete the purchase. He stopped addressing Victor. Maya read the balance once and immediately began listing which systems had to be inspected before closing. Victor offered $3,300,000. The representative reminded him that he had not registered for a whole company purchase. Victor said Titan could arrange it. His confidence returned as he spoke. He assumed the contest would become an auction and that an 18-year-old would panic when an established firm added another zero. I did not add another zero. I placed a signed intent and a $300,000 deposit on the clean room table. The administrator had wanted certainty more than a bidding spectacle. If I completed the balance by noon, the auction would end. Victor called 3 banks before we left. By morning, Titan had the money. By morning, I had already transferred mine. At 10:17, $3,200,000 left my account. At 10:19, the auction banners came down. Maya placed a ring of factory keys in my hand. Victor arrived 20 minutes later carrying a financing letter. He read the notice on the gate, then looked through the fence at me standing beneath Hartwell's faded sign. He did not shout. He simply folded the letter smaller and smaller until it disappeared in his fist. I asked whether Titan still needed those machines inspected. He walked back to his car. I now owned a factory larger than my entire high school campus. I also had less than $500,000 of truly uncommitted cash after outstanding equipment deliveries and immediate restart costs. The company had no revenue. 42 former workers were waiting to learn whether my purchase meant jobs or another liquidation. Lumen had less than 24 days. The keys felt heavier than the $40,000 brokerage receipt. I called the workers into the old cafeteria. Some came in factory coats. Others had already taken temporary jobs and arrived in uniforms from warehouses or stores. They expected a speech from an investor. They found me standing beside Maya and Ethan with my teenage face and plain black jacket. Uneasy conversation moved across the room. I did not ask them to believe in my vision. I told them the East clean room would restart. Every returning employee would receive the wages Hartwell still owed within 24 hours, and the first 42 people willing to work would keep their seniority. An older technician asked whether the former owner had funded the payment. I transferred the wages while he watched. Phones began vibrating around the cafeteria. One woman covered her mouth. Another sat down and counted the deposit twice. The conversation stopped without anyone telling it to. I told them that from that moment Hartwell Electronics was dead. The new company was Nova Forge. Maya had the temporary sign printed before sunset. The factory changed faster than anyone outside understood. Ethan took over the cleanroom modifications. Maya rebuilt the production schedule and found parts hidden in storage that the auction inventory had ignored. The returning workers cleaned lines, tested power, and repaired machines they had once assumed would be sold overseas. I gave Maya authority to spend up to $100,000 without waiting for my signature. She looked at the paper, then asked what title came with that responsibility. I offered Chief Operating Officer. She said I had known her for 6 hours. I told her I had watched her defend a dead factory from buyers who wanted to strip it. 6 hours was more useful than 6 interviews. She accepted after changing the spending limit to $150,000. That was the first negotiation she won against me. At home, my mother watched a local news report about the mystery teenager who had purchased Hartwell. The reporter used my school photograph because no one had a business portrait. My mother turned from the television to me, then back to the television. She asked whether paying off the house had been the small part. I told her it was now. The first 3 days at Nova Forge consumed money like fire consumed paper. Replacement filters, server cabinets, power converters, safety inspections, wages, and raw materials reduced my free cash below $200,000. Arcadia's future license income existed, but it would arrive over time. A company valuation meant nothing when a supplier wanted payment that afternoon. That was when Victor made his first move. Titan quietly persuaded 2 component suppliers to cancel our deliveries. Their representatives claimed inventory shortages. Lumen's archive showed no such event in the original history because Nova Forge had not existed. My choices were already changing the future. For the first time, the AI could not tell me exactly what happened next. Ethan needed the missing converters to build the transfer interface. Without them, we would lose 4 days. 4 days was the difference between a careful migration and gambling Lumen's entire core on the final night. I asked Maya which supplier still had stock. One small industrial distributor across the state owned enough converters, but Arcadia had reserved them for a device production emergency. In my first life, I would have begged Arcadia's procurement office. In this life, Arcadia's president was waiting for my next design. I called him directly. He answered from an executive meeting. I told him Nova Forge could improve the controller architecture and reduce Arcadia's component cost, but only if my cleanroom remained on schedule. I did not ask him to give me the converters. I offered a paid upgrade to the license, worth $12 million across the coming device generation, if Arcadia released the stock, and advanced $2 million on the expanded contract. The room around him went quiet enough for me to hear papers stop moving. He asked whether Nova Forge was the bankrupt factory from the news. I said it had been bankrupt before I bought it. Arcadia sent the converters that night. The $2 million advance arrived the next morning. My free cash rose from less than $200,000 to more than $2 million, and the executives who had doubted a teenager could make payroll began requesting tours. I declined every tour. Money was no longer the hardest problem. Time was. Lumen's battery fell below 15 days while Ethan finished the physical interface. Each attempt to translate the future core into a form our servers could receive consumed more energy. The blue strip dimmed from bright cyan to a thin line. Maya caught me checking it in the clean room. Until then, she believed the black device was an experimental processor. She had watched me predict supplier failures, choose forgotten machines, and describe production methods no teenager should know. She closed the clean room door and said Nova Forge could not survive if its owner collapsed from hiding the actual objective. So I told her part of the truth. I said Lumen contained 23 years of technology knowledge and had 20 days when I began. I told her its cell would fail, the data could not be copied normally, and every decision I had made was meant to build the transfer system before the countdown ended. She asked where the device came from. I told her the answer would sound impossible. She looked around the factory I had purchased with money made in one afternoon, then at Ethan building a controller from a diagram years ahead of the market. She said impossible had become an accounting category since meeting me. I told her about 2032. I did not describe every grief. I gave her the useful facts: Asterion, Victor, my death, the rebirth, and the damaged archive. Maya listened without interruption. Then she asked Lumen a question only a machine from the future could answer. What product had she personally designed that never carried her name? Lumen described Titan's gesture-based mobile interface, including the internal project number Victor had later buried. Maya sat against the cleanroom wall. When she stood again, her expression had changed. She no longer saw Novaforge as a risky factory purchased by a talented teenager. She saw the one place where her stolen future could be rewritten. She moved the production schedule to 24-hour shifts. 11 days remained. The servers were ready. The interface was almost ready. Then the weather alert appeared across every screen in the factory. A storm large enough to cut regional power was moving toward the city. It would arrive on the same night we planned to begin the transfer. And Lumen quietly reduced its survival estimate to 8 days. The storm was still 4 days away, but I spent as if it had already reached the gates. Maya found 2 industrial battery banks at a hospital construction site where the developer had stopped paying contractors. The supplier wanted $600,000 in a week to deliver them. I offered $800,000 for both, provided they reached Novaforge before midnight. Trucks rolled through our gate 5 hours later. Ethan objected to the price until I showed him Lumen's revised battery estimate. 7 days, 19 hours. He stopped objecting. We bought fuel generators, copper cable, cooling units, and every compatible storage drive within 300 miles. The last $1 million of Arcadia's advance disappeared across a dozen urgent orders. By dawn, my available cash was once again measured in hundreds of thousands rather than millions. Yet the factory floor had changed. Thick orange cables ran from the east wing to redundant power rooms. Server racks filled the clean room behind transparent walls. 42 workers moved in shifts around equipment that had been dark for years. Money left my account and became something more powerful than a balance. It became time. Victor tried to buy that time away from me. Titan's representatives contacted the generator supplier and offered double for our reservation. The supplier called Maya, expecting a bidding contest. She reminded him that the equipment was already on our trucks and that our payment had cleared. Then she offered his drivers a completion bonus if every truck reached our gate early. They arrived under police escort hired by Arcadia's president, who had become personally interested in whether his new $12 million design partner survived the week. Victor could not understand the difference between having money and being the person others wanted to succeed. On the 5th night, Ethan completed the transfer bridge. It looked nothing like Lumen's elegant future shell. Copper lines spread across a white table. Cooling pipes ran into a cabinet made from 2 medical enclosures. A dozen indicator lights blinked in no pattern anyone had designed for beauty. Lumen called it inefficient. Ethan looked offended until the AI added that it was also viable. That single word caused 42 exhausted workers to cheer through the glass. We could have started immediately, but Maya forced us to run a full simulation. The first attempt overloaded 3 storage nodes. The second corrupted a test model. The third survived, but only by using every redundant server at once. We repaired the weak points while thunder rolled beyond the factory walls. Battery estimate, 31 hours. The storm arrived early. Rain struck the roof so hard that conversation became difficult. The regional grid failed at 9:12 that night. Novaforge went dark for half a second, then the battery banks engaged. White lights returned across the clean room. Outside the east wing, the rest of the factory remained black to preserve power. We began the migration. Lumen's blue strip widened as its core entered transfer mode. The first 1% took 6 minutes. The progress display said the entire process would require 10 hours. Its remaining battery said 9. Ethan checked the figures twice. The storm cooling had changed resistance inside the damaged cell. We were 1 hour short. Maya asked what could be removed. Lumen divided its archive into 3 layers. The first contained its reasoning core and language systems. The second contained the technical library. Patents, materials, software architectures, manufacturing records, product failures. The third contained the detailed financial history that had made the first trade possible. Deleting the third layer would save more than an hour. That archive held winning markets, acquisitions, and corporate collapses for 23 years. With it, I could have turned every crisis into money. Without it, the future would become uncertain as soon as our actions changed the timeline. In my first life, I had lost a company because I treated control as something I could recover later. This time, I would not lose Lumen's mind to preserve a list of prices. I told it to sacrifice the detailed market history. Lumen asked for confirmation. Its voice sounded no different, yet deleting the records felt like erasing the easiest version of my future. I confirmed. The estimate fell to 8 hours, 12 minutes. At 40%, the factory generators began to fail. One of the fuel filters had been damaged during transport. Power flickered between the batteries and the remaining generator. Ethan ran across the dark production floor with replacement parts, while Maya redirected every non-essential circuit. The cleanroom temperature climbed. I stayed beside Lumen. Its physical device was too delicate to move once transfer began. The blue strip had fractured into separate points of light. On the server display, sections of the technical archive appeared and vanished as error correction fought the damaged connection. At 68%, water entered the west electrical room. Workers stacked sandbags in darkness. At 74, the second generator dropped offline. The battery banks could carry us for 40 minutes. The migration needed 53. Maya shut down the cleanroom cooling for every cabinet except the receiving core. Temperature warnings covered the screens. She shut down the office network, exterior lights, cafeteria freezers, and every machine not physically necessary. The estimate fell by 6 minutes. We still needed 7. I looked through the glass at the old production line. Its control system consumed almost nothing, but its standby transformers did. Shutting them down manually would save the remaining power. It would also erase the calibration Maya had spent days rebuilding. She did not hesitate. She pulled the master handle herself. Every status light on Nova Forge's restored line went black. The transfer reached 90%. Ethan returned soaked with rain and fuel. He repaired the filter while the battery display counted backward. 10 minutes. 6. 3. At 99%, Lumen's physical voice stopped. The blue points on the device went dark. For a moment, the receiving servers showed nothing but a frozen progress bar. Ethan placed both hands on the table. Maya stood beside the master switch, staring through the glass. I had died once already, but those silent seconds frightened me more than the truck. Then every server fan changed pitch. A thin cyan line appeared across the central monitor. Lumen told me the transfer was complete. The factory erupted. Workers shouted in the dark corridor. Ethan leaned against the cabinet and laughed until he could not breathe. Maya turned the production line back on one section at a time. Beyond the windows, the city remained black, but Nova Forge's sign flickered to life above the gate. The palm-sized future device on the table was dead. Lumen now occupied 6 racks of hot, mismatched 2009 servers. It processed thoughts more slowly, and 21% of the technical archive had been lost. The exact market history was gone except for the 4 unopened high-confidence packets already isolated before deletion. But the mine survived. By sunrise, photographs of the glowing Nova Forge sign had spread across local news. The old Hartwell workers had kept the factory running while half the industrial district lost power. Arcadia's president arrived in rubber boots, walked through the restarted line, and signed the final version of our $12 million contract on the cleanroom workbench. He asked again whether I would sell Arcadia exclusive rights. I asked whether Arcadia wanted to license our next operating system instead. Maya looked at me sharply. Lumen's 4th packet had opened after the migration. It did not contain a stock or acquisition. It contained the outline of the mobile software revolution. In 2009, pocket computers were crowded with tiny menus. Manufacturers treated touchscreens like keyboards without buttons. Developers rebuilt the same application for every device. Consumers accepted delay and confusion because they had never seen anything better. The packet described Halo OS, a platform with fluid touch gestures, a single application market, instant device synchronization, and a power manager based on Ethan's controller. None of the individual ideas sounded magical. Together, years ahead of the market, they would make every existing phone feel ancient. Arcadia's president offered $5 million for a prototype. I declined. He raised the number to $20 million for first licensing rights. I told him Nova Forge would fund the prototype itself. When it worked, Arcadia could stand in the same licensing line as everyone else. He looked around the factory he had expected to find dying. The line was restarting behind us. Engineers carried parts beneath a new sign. Ethan was using Arcadia's own contract money to build a product that could reduce Arcadia from a market leader to a customer. The president began laughing. He said he would keep his calendar open. The $12 million contract restored our cash. I allocated $4 million to factory modernization, $2 million to Halo OS development, and enough to guarantee wages for a year. I kept the rest as working capital. Nova Forge finally had more time than Lumen's dead battery could measure. Maya hired software engineers from companies that had rejected her. Ethan recruited technicians without degrees and tested them by placing broken boards on a table. The polite registration clerk from Arcadia accepted our offer to manage industry partnerships after her own manager claimed credit for letting us through the door. Her commission on the first contract was larger than her previous annual salary. We did not hire hundreds. We hired people who had been overlooked for reasons unrelated to what they could build. My school mailed warnings about my absences. A guidance counselor visited Nova Forge with forms about protecting my future. She arrived while 3 Arcadia executives waited outside the clean room for my decision on a production schedule. Maya gave her a visitor badge and invited her to wait with them. I signed the school withdrawal papers between 2 licensing calls. The counselor asked whether I understood how difficult it was to succeed without a degree. Arcadia's president came out of the meeting, shook my hand, and thanked me for saving his product line. The counselor quietly placed the forms back in her folder. By spring, the first Halo OS prototype ran on a discarded Arcadia phone. Maya touched the screen and Windows followed her fingers without delay. Ethan unplugged the charger, expecting the unfinished software to drain the battery. The power estimate doubled instead. Lumen had given us the map, but the product belonged to the people in that room. History had only shown what could exist. Maya made it feel alive. Ethan made old hardware obey it. Nova Forge made it repeatable. I kept the prototype secret for 3 months. During that time, our Arcadia licensing revenue funded a new server hall for Lumen. We moved the AI out of the improvised cleanroom racks and into a permanent core beneath the factory. Its responses became fast again. It still could not recover the deleted market archive. When I asked for tomorrow's winning stock, it answered that no reliable record remained. That limitation made the next decision mine. The Continental Mobile Expo was the largest device conference in the country. Titan Mobile planned to announce its first premium phone there. Victor had spent a year positioning himself as the executive who understood the future. He controlled the main stage, the largest booth, and most of the invited press. Nova Forge received no invitation. Victor's office sent us an offer instead. Titan would buy Halo OS before the expo for $200 million, provided I transferred the code, patents, and development team. The letter described the amount as more money than a teenager could reasonably spend in a lifetime. $200 million was enough to buy mansions, aircraft, and every ordinary form of comfort I had once lacked. It was also less than Halo OS would earn in its first years if we kept control. I turned the offer face down. Then I asked Maya how much it would cost to rent the unfinished hotel across the street from Victor's expo hall. She checked the number and asked whether I wanted a room. I told her I wanted the building, the exterior screens, the ballroom, and every window facing Titan's main entrance for 1 week. For $3 million, the hotel became our private launch stage. Victor owned the expo. I intended to own what everyone saw when they walked outside. The morning of the Continental Mobile Expo, Titan's banners covered the convention center like flags over conquered territory. Victor's face appeared beside the Titan 1, a thick silver phone advertised as the device that would define the decade. Reporters filled the entrance. Retail executives wore Titan badges around their necks. A line of black cars delivered people who had ignored Nova Forge's requests for meetings 6 months earlier. Across the street, our hotel still looked unfinished. Construction cloth covered the lower floors. The lobby had no furniture except folding tables. Workers were mounting exterior screens while expo guests passed and laughed at the noise. Maya looked at the empty ballroom, then at the growing crowd outside Titan's doors, and asked whether $3 million had purchased the world's most expensive empty room. I told her to wait until noon. At 9, Victor began his keynote. We watched on a projector while his Titan 1 moved through small menus with visible delay. He described ordinary features as revolutions. The audience applauded because Titan controlled distribution, advertising, and the best component contracts. A product did not have to be excellent when every important company had already agreed to sell it. Then Victor announced that Titan had attempted to acquire an immature operating system from a minor supplier. He did not name us. He said the owners had chosen pride over partnership and would learn that ideas without access were worthless. Maya looked at me. I told her he had just advertised our launch for free. At noon, every screen on our hotel turned cyan. The construction cloth fell away, revealing one sentence across 10 floors. Your phone is already obsolete. Expo guests stopped in the street. Cameras turned away from Titan's entrance. The hotel ballroom doors opened, and 100 Nova Forge developer phones lit simultaneously on the tables inside. We had invited no general audience. We invited repair technicians, independent application creators, university programmers, small retailers, and every journalist Titan placed in the rear rows. The people established companies considered unimportant filled the room first. Their posts and live streams drew everyone else. I walked onto a simple black platform carrying a scratched Arcadia phone from the previous year. Victor's Titan 1 cost nearly $1,000. My device could be purchased used for less than $100. I touched the screen. Halo OS woke instantly. Windows flowed beneath my fingers. Applications opened without searching through folders. A photograph taken on the phone appeared on a laptop across the stage without a cable. The battery display showed twice the remaining time of the standard software. Then Maya brought out the Halo Market. One account, one place to discover software, one button to install it. Developers kept most of the sale, and any manufacturer could license the platform without giving Nova Forge its hardware business. The room became quiet in a different way than the brokerage office had. No one was waiting for me to fail. They were calculating how quickly they could join. An executive from a major carrier raised his hand and asked what device would ship with Halo OS. I held up the scratched phone. I told him 5 existing models could run it that afternoon. The public download opened. The counter behind me reached 10,000 before I finished the sentence. It crossed 100,000 while reporters pushed toward the stage. Across the street, Titan's keynote screens went dark as staff closed the curtains to hide our hotel. That only made the exterior glow brighter. Victor arrived through the ballroom's side entrance surrounded by executives. He did not congratulate me. He placed a check on the demonstration table. $200 million. The offer was real this time, not a letter. Cameras caught the number. Victor told the room Titan would acquire Halo OS, preserve our team, and give the technology the distribution it deserved. To everyone watching, it sounded generous. A 19-year-old was being offered more money than most founders would see in a lifetime. I turned the check face down. I told Victor that Titan could license Halo OS for the published rate like every other manufacturer. One reporter laughed before covering it with a cough. Victor's hand remained on the table. Behind him, the download counter crossed 500,000. He warned me that no carrier would support a platform Titan opposed. The carrier executive who had asked the first question stepped onto the stage and requested a private licensing meeting. Then Arcadia's president entered. He had kept his calendar open. He announced that Arcadia's next 3 devices would ship with Halo OS, subject to final testing. Other executives began removing Titan badges before approaching Maya's partnership table. Victor picked up his check and left through a corridor crowded with developers installing my software. By midnight, Halo OS had 1 million users. Within a month, it had 5 million. The number mattered because each user attracted developers, and each application made the platform harder for manufacturers to ignore. We did not earn billions from downloads overnight. We gained something more useful. Control of the doorway between consumers and every future mobile service. Arcadia and 3 smaller manufacturers signed contracts worth $120 million across the next year. Nova Forge's valuation passed $1 billion, though I could not spend that number. The contracts gave us enough real cash to expand production, hire support teams, and build a device of our own. Rumors called me the teenage billionaire. My personal bank account did not contain $1 billion. I owned almost all of a company investors believed was worth more than that. The distinction did not make the reaction smaller. When I returned to my old neighborhood, the property manager who once demanded a guarantor asked whether I wanted to purchase the entire print shop block. I did. The garage where Ethan and I built the first board became a small research office, and the repair shop where I found him became a free hardware laboratory under his direction. I also bought a glass-walled penthouse near Nova Forge, not because I needed to prove anything, but because waking before dawn in a factory office had become inefficient. The salesperson showed me the smallest available unit until the building manager recognized my name. I asked for the top floor, the private garage, and the neighboring unit for guests. The manager spent the rest of the meeting answering Maya instead of guessing what I could afford. My mother visited once, stood before the windows, and asked why anyone needed 2 kitchens. I told her one came with the neighboring unit. She decided billionaires were bad at counting kitchens and returned to the house she preferred. The lifestyle was pleasant, the leverage was better. Manufacturers now sent prototypes to Nova Forge before announcing them. Developers optimized new applications for Halo OS first. Arcadia's president waited for our compatibility approval. At industry dinners, hosts who once placed Victor at the center began keeping the seat beside me empty. Maya enjoyed watching the change more than she admitted. At one event, an organizer tried to direct her toward staff seating until the host crossed the room to greet her as Nova Forge's chief operating officer. She accepted the apology, then moved our entire team to the main table. Victor spent dinner looking at the chairs his executives had lost. Our victory also created a weakness. Halo OS ran best on a new class of efficient chips. Nova Forge could design around existing parts, but our own phone needed components produced by one specialized fabrication plant. Titan purchased that plant's entire output for 2 years. Victor announced the agreement publicly. He called it supply discipline. Everyone understood the message. Software could attract users, but without chips, Nova Forge could not become a device company. Ethan found 3 alternatives. All were slower, hotter, or years from production. Maya suggested delaying our phone and licensing Halo OS only. The safe choice would earn hundreds of millions without risking a factory expansion. Lumen opened the 5th opportunity packet. It identified Meridian Microfabrication, an abandoned chip plant on the coast. Meridian had failed because its largest customer canceled an order. Its machines were considered too old for the next generation. One repaired line, combined with designs in Lumen's technical archive, could produce the efficient chip we needed. The owner wanted $70 million and a buyer within 10 days. After that, the equipment would be exported separately. Our licensing contracts could cover the purchase, but doing so would consume most of the cash reserved for Halo OS expansion and device development. Nova Forge's billion-dollar valuation could not pay the seller. Only committed money mattered. Victor requested a meeting at the same time. He arrived at my penthouse expecting the supply blockade to make me reasonable. The city glowed beneath the windows. He offered the $200 million acquisition again, plus a senior title at Titan. This time he said I could keep the penthouse. I asked whether Titan's chip agreement was exclusive. He smiled and said it was absolute. I showed him Meridian's purchase document. The $70 million transfer had cleared that morning. Victor read the factory address. His smile disappeared because Meridian did more than solve my supply problem. It manufactured one of the specialty controllers Titan used in its own premium phones. Titan's exclusive supplier depended on Meridian for part of its line. He had blocked my chips. I had purchased the factory beneath his supply chain. I told him his next component shipment would arrive on schedule. Nova Forge honored contracts. The shipment after that would cost the new market price. Victor closed his acquisition folder without presenting the papers. When he left, Maya asked whether buying factories every time he annoyed me was becoming a habit. I told her only when the factory was useful. The truth was larger. My first fortune came from knowing what price would rise. My second came from solving a bounty. Halo S made us a platform. Meridian would make us infrastructure. Meridian was 3 times larger than Nova Forge and 10 times quieter when we arrived. Salt wind moved through the empty loading yard. The main fabrication building had no lights. Crates marked for export stood beside machines wrapped in gray film. A liquidation crew had already numbered the equipment. We had purchased the company before the deadline, but ownership did not make a deadline produce chips. The former plant director met us at the gate. She had been ordered to preserve the building until transfer, and she expected a financial buyer who would resell the property. Instead, Maya handed her a restart schedule. Ethan asked for the maintenance records. I announced that every technician willing to return within 48 hours would receive 6 months of guaranteed pay and a completion bonus when the first usable wafer left the line. The director looked at the date on the schedule. We wanted output in 60 days. Meridian's previous owner had estimated 18 months. I told her the previous owner did not have Ethan. Ethan was already halfway inside a machine. Lumen's technical library contained later improvements to Meridian's process, but once again knowledge was not the same as execution. Replacement parts had to be manufactured, contaminated rooms had to be cleaned. Workers who had scattered across the coast had to believe the plant would not close again after one paycheck. I made belief visible. Nova Forge transferred the first payroll before anyone returned. I purchased the neighboring warehouse for $12 million and turned it into housing, workshops, and a training center. When a supplier demanded advance payment because Meridian's old debts frightened him, I paid for a full year of material and made Nova Forge the preferred customer. Every action said the same thing. The factory was not being prepared for sale. It was becoming the center of my next industry. Within a week, more than 200 workers came back. Victor could not cancel their courage, so he attacked the schedule. Titan announced its own software market and a new phone launch in 90 days. The advertising showed a smooth interface that resembled an unfinished version of Halo OS. Maya recognized pieces of the gesture system she had designed in her original future. This time, Victor had built it early because our success taught him what mattered. Lumen could not predict his exact product. History had diverged too far. The AI could compare designs and failures, but it could no longer tell us what Titan would do on a particular morning. That uncertainty energized Maya. She did not want to copy the future she had once lost. She wanted to defeat the man who had taken credit for it. She combined the Halo market, instant synchronization, and a simple developer toolkit into an update Titan could not reproduce before launch. Ethan redesigned the Meridian chip to run both Halo OS and our future AI services. I gave them one objective: make the light phone so far ahead that distribution contracts became irrelevant because customers would demand it by name. The device began as a black rectangle on a Nova Forge table. It had no logo, no polished case, and wires emerging where the camera belonged. Yet when Maya touched the screen, it responded like thought. Applications moved between the phone and a desktop without setup. Ethan placed it under a heat lamp while streaming video, and the body remained cool. I approved production before the exterior design was final. Maya said we could build 200,000 units in the first run if Meridian delivered on time. Titan planned 1 million. Retail analysts would compare the numbers and declare us too small. I told her to build 200,000 and make the shortage famous. At Meridian, the first repaired line started on day 58. Workers gathered behind the glass as the machines moved. No dramatic music played. There was only the low mechanical hum of equipment everyone had been told would never run again. The first wafer failed. So did the second. The third passed enough tests to continue. Ethan held the finished chip beneath a lamp, his fingers trembling. In another life, companies had rejected him for lacking a degree. Now 2 factories waited for the small square in his hand. I gave him 10% ownership of Meridian and permanent leadership of its hardware research division. He asked whether I understood how much that stake could become. I told him that was why I gave it. Maya received 5% of Nova Forge and an equal seat in every product decision. She had turned a silent factory into a company capable of launching software across millions of devices. Cash rewards could be spent. Ownership meant Victor could never erase their names from the wall the way he had erased mine. The light phone launch took place 1 year after the storm. Titan chose the same week for its counter launch. Victor filled an arena with celebrities and stacked 1 million devices in warehouses. Carriers placed Titan advertisements in every store. He expected scale to crush us before customers could compare the products. I used the final floor of our unfinished hotel venue, now fully completed and purchased by Nova Forge. The audience could see the original exterior screen through the glass. Maya demonstrated Halo OS. Ethan explained only what the Meridian chip allowed people to feel: instant response, cool operation, and 2 days of ordinary use. Then I placed the phone on sale in 20 countries through the Halo market. The first 200,000 units sold in 9 minutes. Retail sites crashed under requests for more. Customers lined outside Nova Forge partner stores that had once refused our calls. The shortage did exactly what I wanted. Every unavailable light phone became a photograph, a resale listing, and a public argument about why Titan's heavily advertised product remained on shelves. Victor appeared on business television and said 200,000 units were a novelty, not an industry. We opened pre-orders. 5 million reservations arrived in 3 days. Meridian added a second line. Nova Forge expanded assembly around the clock. Arcadia and 2 other manufacturers ordered our chip for their own Halo OS devices, turning the factory Victor tried to deny us into a supplier he could not ignore. Titan's exclusive chip agreement became a burden. It had committed huge money to components customers no longer preferred. At the next industry conference, Victor requested a private meeting. He arrived expecting to renegotiate Meridian's component prices. I met him in a room overlooking a floor filled with light phone displays. Presidents from 6 manufacturers waited outside for their own appointments. Victor said Titan could give Meridian guaranteed volume. I told him Meridian's next 18 months were already sold. He offered to pay a premium. I reminded him that his current contract would be honored. Nova Forge did not break promises. New capacity, however, belonged first to companies supporting Halo OS. He called that coercion. I called it distribution. The same gate Victor had once controlled now opened from my side. By 2013, light phone revenue crossed $1 billion. Halo OS served more than 70 million users. The Halo market contained hundreds of thousands of applications. Nova Forge and Meridian employed thousands, but I kept their original names beneath the Lightcore group I created to own the platform, factories, cloud network, and future research. Lightcore was not just a holding company. It made the structure visible. Money from devices funded cloud centers. Cloud centers made Halo OS synchronization faster. Halo OS demand filled Meridian's lines. Meridian's chips made the next light phone harder to match. Each victory powered the next instead of depending on a new prediction. Lumen remained hidden beneath the first factory. Only Ethan and Maya knew what the server core truly contained. To everyone else, Lightcore's impossible speed came from a secret research program in my instinct. That reputation became valuable on its own. Engineers left famous companies for the chance to work on projects I approved. Governments asked where we would build the next plant. Banks that once would not open a serious account for an 18-year-old competed to finance factories I could already afford. I enjoyed the changes. I bought a long-range aircraft because losing 2 days to commercial connections was more expensive than the plane. I purchased the hotel where Halo S launched and kept the original ballroom unchanged. When executives asked why Lightcore owned a hotel, Maya told them it was a receipt. My mother still preferred the old house. She accepted a new car only after I chose one that looked ordinary. She carried groceries past reporters and told them her son had always been impatient. They treated it as an insight into my strategy. Victor's position shrank in comparison, but he did not disappear. Titan merged with 2 established manufacturers and used their patents, carriers, and political access to slow our expansion. It copied features quickly and sold respectable devices. Victor was not stupid. He was learning from every defeat. That made him more dangerous than the man in my first life. In 2016, Lightcore prepared to enter a new region where Titan controlled nearly every retailer. Victor persuaded the distributors that carrying Lightphone would cost them Titan's entire catalog. Our usual partners backed away. Maya suggested direct online sales. I wanted more than a workaround. I wanted permanent access. The 6th opportunity packet identified Harbor Grid, a struggling logistics and retail network with warehouses, delivery routes, and small electronics stores across the region. Its owners wanted $300 million. Analysts considered it an outdated chain. To Lightcore, it was a road into 20 million homes. Victor attended the sale expecting to purchase Harbor Grid's best warehouses for Titan. He found my aircraft on the runway before his arrived. By the time he entered the meeting, I had offered the owners the full $300 million, kept every useful employee, and committed another $200 million to convert the stores into Halo service centers. Victor asked why a technology company wanted delivery trucks. I told him software was powerful, chips were stronger, and distribution made both unavoidable. Harbor Grid joined Lightcore. The stores changed signs in one weekend. Lightphone launched across the region without asking Titan's retailers for shelf space. Customers ordered through Halo Market and received devices the next day from warehouses Victor had expected to own. Lightcore's valuation passed $50 billion. At the public reopening of Harbor Grid's largest center, a reporter asked Victor whether Titan still considered us a minor supplier. He watched delivery vehicles leave beneath the Lightcore symbol and declined to answer. I had started with $80 and one dying machine. Now I own the software, the chips, the factories, and the road to the customer. But the 7th and final opportunity packet was still unopened. Its date was 2032. The years after Harbor Grid did not pass quietly. They accelerated. Every new Lightcore market changed what the next market expected. Customers no longer asked whether a phone had a touchscreen. They asked whether it ran Halo OS. Developers no longer asked whether our application market would survive. They planned launches around its front page. Manufacturers that had once demanded exclusivity began promising us exclusive models for the privilege of using Meridian's newest chips. I stopped thinking of money as something that purchased objects. Lightcore's money purchased position. We built cloud centers beside Harbor Grid warehouses, so every distribution site also moved data. We purchased a small display company and gave it $1 billion research budget. We opened 2 more fabrication plants rather than trusting one coast. When a university laboratory created a battery material everyone considered too expensive, I bought the laboratory's commercial partner and placed the material in our premium devices. The resulting phone lasted 4 days. The acquisition cost looked excessive until every competitor began ordering the same battery from us. Victor started calling Lightcore an empire in interviews. He intended the word as an accusation. Our customers treated it as a description. By 2020, more than 1 billion active devices used Halo OS. Lightcore annual revenue passed $100 billion. Its valuation moved beyond $200 billion, and my controlling stake made me wealthier on paper than every executive who had dismissed the garage. I also held billions in liquid reserves, though I kept most capital inside the company. The private aircraft became a fleet used by engineering teams. The penthouse became one of several homes I rarely occupied. My favorite room remained the old hotel ballroom where Victor's check had been turned face down. I kept the check itself framed beneath the download counter from launch day. Maya called it my most expensive decoration. I told her it had cost Victor more. Our relationship settled into a rhythm that no executive could imitate. She challenged every schedule I shortened, then found a way to beat the revised one. I approved impossible budgets. She converted them into factories, teams, and launches that looked inevitable afterward. At public events, reporters tried to discover whether she was merely my employee, my partner, or the person secretly controlling Lightcore. Maya answered that all 3 rumors underestimated her. Ethan avoided most stages. He preferred clean rooms, prototypes, and technicians who cared more about a signal line than a camera. Yet when Meridian's 1000th engineer gathered for an anniversary, he showed them the copper controller from his old repair shop. It sat inside a glass case worth less than the case itself. That ugly board had earned $4 million, saved Lumen, and begun an industry. Ethan's 10% Meridian stake made him a billionaire. He still repaired radios when thinking. I did not become generous to everyone. I became precise about who benefited from my rise. The clerk who led us into Arcadia led global partnerships and held enough Lightcore stock to retire whenever she wished. The returning Hartwell workers received shares after the storm. Suppliers who honored early promises became permanent partners. Those who abandoned Nova Forge for Victor discovered that Lightcore plants always had another source. Money remembered loyalty better when it became ownership. Victor built his own network of loyalty through fear and access. Titan absorbed older manufacturers, purchased media channels, and funded standards organizations. Its devices rarely surpassed ours, but they were good enough to remain everywhere. Each year, Victor presented himself as the necessary alternative to Lightcore's growing control. The rivalry made headlines and sold products for both companies. Beneath the theater, he was preparing something larger. In 2027, Lumen detected an unusual pattern across public patent filings. Titan, 3 carriers, 2 cloud companies, and several established device makers were developing parts of the same communication standard. They called it Unity Mesh. If adopted globally, every intelligent device would require certification controlled by the consortium. Lightcore had been excluded. Victor had stopped trying to beat one phone. He intended to place a gate in front of the entire future. The standard would launch in 2032. That year already existed in every quiet corner of my mind. In the original timeline, 2032 was when Victor removed me from Asterion, took Lumen, and left me with $17. In this life, there was no Asterion. There was no debt. My mother was alive and healthy. Maya and Ethan owned pieces of what they built. Yet Victor had recreated the shape of the final trap at a much larger scale. He controlled the votes before the meeting began. Maya wanted Lightcore to reject Unity Mesh and launch an independent standard. Ethan warned that 2 incompatible networks would divide manufacturers and governments. Lumen could analyze the technology, but not the political commitments hidden behind it. The 7th packet remained sealed. Its label showed one date, October 14th, 2032, the anniversary of my rebirth and the day I had died in the first timeline. Opening it earlier risked making the contents useless. I chose to wait. That decision frustrated every part of me that had survived by moving first. For 5 years, I built strength without knowing the exact final opportunity. We expanded Lightcore's cloud network until Unity Mesh could not operate efficiently without touching our infrastructure. We funded open device tools that made independent manufacturers loyal to Halo OS. Meridian created a low-power AI processor capable of running advanced models without constant cloud access. Ethan called it the Lumen architecture, unaware that reporters would later assume the name Honored Light rather than a hidden machine beneath NovaForge. We also built Atlas, a private global network standard compatible with existing devices. We did not announce it. Every light phone produced after 2029 quietly contained the required hardware. Partner factories added the same component under ordinary upgrade agreements. Harbor Grid installed Atlas relays beside distribution centers. The network existed before anyone outside Lightcore knew its name. That was my answer to Victor's Gate. I built the road around it first. In public, I behaved as if Lightcore feared exclusion. I attended consortium dinners and listened while executives explained that Unity Mesh would create a fair technology ecosystem. They offered Lightcore limited access in exchange for our patents, cloud capacity, and permanent minority voting status. Victor enjoyed those meetings. At one summit, he placed a thick membership agreement before me. The entry payment was $10 billion. More important, Lightcore would surrender control of its device identity system to the consortium. Victor said even the largest empire eventually needed neighbors. I asked whether Titan would surrender the same control. He said founding members had different obligations. I closed the folder. He reminded me that without Unity certification, Lightcore devices could be banned from major carrier networks in 2032. For the first time since the Meridian purchase, he believed I had nowhere to go. I thanked him for the warning and left the $10 billion invoice on the table. The story spread through the industry. Some analysts called my refusal reckless. Lightcore's valuation fell for 3 days, erasing tens of billions on screens. None of that money had left our accounts. Customers still bought phones. Factories still produced chips. Atlas relays continued waking one by one. I used the temporary fear to purchase 2 struggling network equipment companies for prices below the month before. Victor's pressure made my secret rollout cheaper. By 2031, Lightcore's valuation reached $600 billion. I owned 61% after employee grants and strategic investments. My stake was worth more than $360 billion. The company held $18 billion in liquid strategic reserves and generated enough annual cash to fund new plants without asking a bank. Those numbers were not the final victory. The room they created was. Presidents scheduled calls around my availability. Entire cities bid for Lightcore campuses. When I entered standards meetings, executives stopped discussing whether I could afford a response and started guessing which industry I would purchase. Victor answered with the largest alliance technology had ever seen. He scheduled the Unity World Summit for October 14, 2032. The venue was Asterion Center, a new glass tower built on the site where Asterion's headquarters had stood in my first life. Titan owned the naming rights. The main stage faced a wall display almost identical to the one that had erased my portrait. Victor invited me as a guest, not a member. The invitation promised 15 minutes to accept the consortium's final terms, before carriers disabled uncertified Lightcore devices. Victor believed the symbolism belonged to him. He could not know what that date and building meant to me. On October 13th, I returned to the original NovaForge cleanroom. The factory had expanded around it, but Maya preserved the old walls. The dead palm-sized device remained beneath glass. Lumen's permanent core now occupied a secure hall below, cooled by systems Meridian built for us alone. Ethan and Maya stood with me as the countdown reached midnight. The 7th packet unlocked. It did not contain a future stock, a hidden factory, or a product design. It contained the record of Unity Mesh's original failure. In the first timeline, the same standard had existed under another name. It collapsed during its launch because the founding companies could not agree on identity control. Victor had solved that problem by placing Titan at the center, but the packet included something even more valuable, the list of infrastructure Unity required to operate at global scale. Lightcore already owned or supplied 68% of it. Cloud routing, low-power chips, device identity patents, regional logistics relays, battery controllers, application verification. The consortium had built a gate and forgotten that I owned the hinges. Lumen calculated that if we activated Atlas during Victor's demonstration, compatible devices would form a faster network without changing hardware. Partner companies could switch by signing one open license. Unity would still function, but it would cost more, use more power, and reach fewer devices. The final packet did not guarantee victory. It showed where to stand. Maya asked how many partners were ready. I opened the secure dashboard. Arcadia had signed. 5 major manufacturers had signed. 3 carriers Victor believed loyal to Unity had signed. They were not betraying a contract. They had accepted a second standard in case Lightcore offered better terms. Ethan asked what those terms would be. I told him the device standard would be open, but the chips, cloud, stores, and software that made it excellent would remain ours. Maya smiled. She said that sounded like generosity designed by a billionaire. At dawn, more than 200 black cars and buses lined the road outside Asterion Center. Victor expected Lightcore to arrive with lawyers. I arrived with the presidents of the companies he thought he controlled. Asterion Center had no connection to the company from my first life, but Victor had copied its atmosphere perfectly. The lobby floor was black marble. Towering screens showed a timeline of Titan's achievements. Victor's portrait appeared above the entrance to the main hall, smiling beneath the Unity symbol. My invitation labeled me as an observer. The last time I entered a building like that, security had carried my life in a cardboard box. This time, the head of security crossed the lobby to greet me. Behind me came Maya, Ethan, Arcadia's president, the leaders of 5 device companies, and 3 carrier executives. Cameras moved backward to keep us all in frame. Unity staff who expected me to arrive alone began speaking urgently into headsets. Victor met us inside the hall. His silver tie matched the one he wore on the day I died. For 1 second, the 2 lives overlapped. I saw the old boardroom, rain on glass, and the folder that had taken my title. Then the Unity display reflected across Victor's face, and I remembered the factories running beneath my name. He welcomed the executives as honored guests and asked why they had entered with me. Arcadia's president answered that Lightcore owned the aircraft. That was true, and not the reason, but it made the surrounding reporters laugh. Victor led the program without showing irritation. He announced Unity Mesh as the first universal intelligent device network. Titan phones, carrier towers, home systems, vehicles, and industrial machines would share one identity standard. More than 30 companies had committed. The stage display showed a map filling with white connections. Lightcore devices remained gray. Victor explained that gray devices would lose access after a 6-month transition unless their manufacturers accepted certification. He invited me onto the stage to protect our customers. An assistant placed the membership folder on a glass table. The terms had not improved. $10 billion. Our identity patents, permanent minority status, consortium approval over every future Lightcore device. Victor spoke softly enough to sound generous. He said no company, regardless of valuation, could stand against an entire industry. I asked him to begin the live demonstration first. He agreed because he wanted me to surrender after the audience saw Unity working. Thousands of devices across the hall woke at once. The map brightened. A Titan phone unlocked a car on stage. A factory arm moved in another country. A medical sensor sent data through a carrier network. Applause rolled through the hall as each connection appeared. Then the response times began increasing. Unity traffic moved through cloud nodes, chip controllers, and verification systems the consortium did not own. Those systems belonged to Lightcore, or used our patents. We did not disable anything. We simply stopped providing the private optimization Titan had assumed would always remain available. The factory arm paused. The car took 3 attempts to unlock. Battery estimates on the demonstration phones fell as repeated identity checks consumed power. Victor's technicians rushed behind the stage. He accused Lightcore of sabotage. I displayed our infrastructure agreement. Every service was operating at the exact public level Titan purchased. Victor had designed Unity while quietly depending on favors from companies he intended to exclude. I told the audience a global standard should not require one executive's private permission. Then I activated Atlas. More than 2 billion compatible devices already contained the hardware. They did not need an update that morning. The network woke in waves across the map. Harbor grid relays connected cities. Meridian processors handled identity checks locally. Halo OS devices formed secure links without sending every action through Titan's center. The gray areas on Victor's display turned cyan. Atlas was faster because it had been built into the infrastructure rather than placed above it. The car unlocked before the driver's hand left the phone. The factory arm moved without hesitation. Medical sensors kept their local privacy while sharing required alerts. Victor told the audience Lightcore's claim was unverified. Arcadia's president stepped onto the stage and announced compatibility. The 5 manufacturers followed. Then the 3 carriers Victor believed bound to Unity switched their demonstration traffic to Atlas. Their logos moved from the white side of the screen to cyan. Phones rose across the hall. Reporters stopped facing Victor. The membership folder still waited between us. I pushed it back. I announced that Atlas certification would cost nothing. Manufacturers could adopt the standard without surrendering their identity systems. Developers could build for it through Halo tools. Lightcore would earn money from the chips, cloud capacity, devices, stores, and services companies voluntarily chose because they worked better. The open license appeared online. Within 10 minutes, 100 companies signed. Within an hour, the number passed 1,000. Unity did not vanish, but its reason for controlling the industry did. Companies could support both standards, and consumers immediately preferred the one already present in their devices. Victor's founding members began requesting private rooms to renegotiate their obligations. He asked me whether I had planned the entire thing from 2009. I looked toward Ethan and Maya. Ethan wore the uncomfortable suit Maya had chosen for him. Maya stood beside the main console, watching partner signatures arrive faster than the display could count. Behind them, the world map glowed in the same cyan as Lumen's first broken light. I told Victor that in 2009 I had planned to survive 30 days. Everything after that was ownership. He tried one final move. Titan offered to purchase Atlas for $50 billion and merge the standards under joint control. The proposal appeared on every screen because Victor wanted the audience to see a number large enough to restore his status. I refused before he finished describing it. $50 billion was more cash than most companies would ever hold. Atlas was the road through the next decade. Selling it would make me rich in a smaller way. I offered Titan the same free standard license as everyone else. The room understood the reversal. Victor had once demanded $10 billion for permission to enter his network. Now his devices needed my network, and I charged him nothing because his payment would come through dependence on infrastructure I already owned. He stopped speaking. The summit ended without the ceremony Titan prepared. Unity's giant logo remained above the stage while executives formed a line beside Maya's licensing desk. Some had ignored NovaForge. Some had supported Victor until that morning. Every one of them waited for a Lightcore representative to approve technical access. I did not buy Titan. That would have turned Victor into another problem inside my company. I allowed the market to measure what remained when his control disappeared. Titan's share price fell. Its merger partners demanded new leadership, and its carriers adopted Atlas to protect their customers. Victor kept money, homes, and enough influence to live comfortably. He lost the position from which he could decide everyone else's future. 3 weeks later, Titan's board replaced him. He exited Asterion Center through the same lobby where his portrait had filled the screens. Staff had already replaced the Unity timeline with Atlas compatibility instructions. Outside, delivery vehicles carried Lightcore devices beneath the glass tower. I watched from the top floor, but I did not need him to see me. The proof was built into everything around him. Lightcore's valuation rose to $640 billion after the Atlas launch. My 61% stake placed my net worth near $390 billion. The company still held around $18 billion in liquid strategic reserves because the launch did not require buying the consortium. It required activating assets we had built for years. The numbers appeared across financial networks, but the better display was physical. NovaForge's original factory ran beside 6 newer campuses. Meridian chips powered devices made by former rivals. Harbor Grid reached hundreds of millions of customers. Halo OS connected more than 2 billion active devices. A line of industry presidents waited for Lightcore's terms in the building where Victor expected me to beg. On the exact anniversary of my death, I was not bankrupt. I owned the future that had once thrown me away. That evening, we returned to NovaForge. Maya refused the banquet Titan's former partners organized and ordered food from the same small place that had served our storm crew. Ethan removed his suit jacket before reaching the factory gate. My mother joined us in the old cafeteria, where 42 workers had once checked their first restored wages. She knew the public version of the story. I had made an impossible market trade, solved a device problem, bought a factory, and never stopped. She did not know that I had held a dying machine against my ribs on the morning I hugged her in 2009. I considered telling her. Then she complained that the world's richest technology founder still forgot to call before dinner. Some facts could wait. Maya brought out the framed Arcadia controller board. Ethan brought the dead Lumen shell from the clean room. We placed them beside a current light phone. The objects looked unrelated. Copper and solder, black glass, polished metal. Together they contained the entire climb from $80 to Lightcore. At midnight, Lumen requested my presence below the factory. Its permanent core had spent the day analyzing Atlas traffic. I entered the server hall alone. Cyan light moved across the racks. The AI congratulated me on surviving the original termination point. I asked whether it had expected me to. Lumen said expectation required reliable data, and I had erased the easy data to save it. That sounded almost like humor. Then a new file appeared on the central screen. It was encrypted with a signature Lumen recognized as its own. The date attached to it was October 14th, 2033. The original archive ended in 2032. No packet should exist beyond the day I died. Lumen had not created the file, and it could not open it without a key that had never been manufactured. For the first time since waking in 2009, the future knew something I did not. I looked through the server hall glass at NovaForge's production lights. I had factories, billions, the strongest device platform in the world, and 2 people upstairs who had built the impossible beside me. Whatever waited inside that file would not find the bankrupt man Victor left in the rain. It would find Adrian, owner of Lightcore. And this time, I had an empire ready before the countdown began. I did not open the 2033 file that night. Lumen could not decode it, and I had learned the cost of forcing damaged knowledge. Instead, I copied the encrypted record into 3 isolated vaults, one beneath NovaForge, one at Meridian, and one inside a cloud center whose location even most Lightcore executives did not know. Ethan designed a physical key system. Maya placed the project under a name so ordinary that no curious employee would recognize it. Then we went back upstairs and finished dinner. The Empire did not pause because the future had sent me another mystery. Atlas activation created more business in 24 hours than the Selene trade created in my first year. Manufacturers needed compatibility testing. Carriers needed relays. Cities wanted local cloud capacity. Developers wanted space inside Halo Market. Every request came with executives, contracts, and numbers that once would have controlled my life. Now they waited in Maya's schedule. The next morning, I entered NovaForge's first cafeteria at 8. The old tables had been restored rather than replaced. On the wall hung photographs from the storm. Workers carrying cable through darkness. Ethan beneath the transfer bridge, Maya beside the dead production line, and the first cyan light after Lumen survived. 42 original workers sat in the front rows. Thousands more watched from Lightcore sites around the world. I announced a permanent Atlas ownership pool for employees who had built the network before anyone knew it existed. The value began at $5 billion in Lightcore shares. Engineers in distant clean rooms stared at the number on their screens. Relay crews in Harbor Grid warehouses began checking whether the announcement was real. It was. I did not call the reward charity. They had built an asset worth far more. Giving them ownership made the next impossible project easier to staff. The older technician who had questioned my payroll in 2009 stood and asked whether the first 42 still received seniority. I told him his employee number was 19. Mine was 1. Maya was 2, Ethan 3, and the old numbers had never been reset. The cafeteria reacted more strongly to that than to the share pool. Lightcore had hundreds of thousands of employees, but the first factory still knew exactly where the line began. After the announcement, I toured the East Wing alone. The forgotten clean room was now a museum visible through glass, though the transfer table remained untouched. Visitors saw the crude bridge, the dead shell, and a caption describing an experimental computing core saved during the regional blackout. They did not know the core had predicted the factory's purchase. A group of students stood before the display. Their guide explained that Adrian had purchased Hartwell for $3,200,000 when everyone else wanted scrap. One student asked what the factory was worth now. The guide answered that no one could separate NovaForge's value from Lightcore anymore. The building had become the birthplace of Halo OS, the first light phone, and Atlas. That was the kind of number I preferred. Not large, but impossible to isolate because it had changed everything around it. At noon, Titan requested a formal meeting. Victor did not attend. The new leadership arrived with the free Atlas license already signed. Titan wanted Meridian processors, Halo market certification, and space inside Harbor Grid stores. They expected punishment, higher prices, or an attempt to acquire their company while its value was weak. I offered standard commercial terms. Maya asked afterward whether I had become merciful. I told her no. Titan as a paying customer was more useful than Titan as a broken trophy. Every device it sold would use our chips, reach our market, and strengthen Atlas. Victor had tried to make dependence humiliating. I made it recurring revenue. She agreed that was less merciful. Victor sent one private message before disappearing from public view. It contained no apology. He asked whether Lumen was a person, a product, or an acronym. He had heard the processor name and remembered the prototype missing from Asterion and another history he should not know. For several minutes, I stared at the message. In this timeline, Asterion had never existed. Victor should not know the name of the black device from 2032. The new encrypted file suddenly felt less like a delayed archive and more like an answer traveling backward. I asked Lumen whether Victor's message matched the signature on the 2033 file. It did not, but both contained a timestamp error measured in the same impossible fraction of a second. The next countdown had already started. I simply could not see its number yet. I did not respond to Victor. Instead, I called a Lightcore strategy meeting in the hotel ballroom where Halo OS launched. The framed $200 million check remained beneath the old counter. Presidents who once occupied the best seats at Victor's events now joined by secure screen. Maya stood on my right. Ethan arrived late with solder on his sleeve and a prototype in his pocket. I announced Tomorrow Foundry, a $10 billion research division designed to build technology beyond Lumen's surviving archive. Its purpose was not to repeat the future. It was to create machines the original 2032 had never contained. We would develop self-sufficient computing cores, new energy cells, orbital relays, and manufacturing systems able to construct parts without depending on a single century's supply chain. Meridian received the first $3 billion. Nova Forge received $2 billion. The remaining 5 funded teams chosen for working prototypes rather than prestigious histories. An executive asked whether the budget required outside investment. I displayed Lightcore's reserves. Even after the allocation, the company held enough cash to operate, expand Atlas, and purchase any essential supplier that tried to become a gatekeeper. We did not need permission. That sentence changed the meeting more than the $10 billion number. Powerful companies lived from funding round to funding round. Lightcore could begin a project larger than most corporations using money already earned by the platform Victor failed to stop. Ethan placed his prototype on the table. It was a small silver power cell built from the battery laboratory we had acquired years earlier. Under ordinary load, it could keep a Lumen-class offline core alive for 5 years. The original device had given me 30 days. Our first attempt at surpassing it gave us 5 years. I approved production before he finished explaining the case design. Maya complained that I had learned nothing about schedules in 23 years. I told her I had learned to hire someone who would fix them. The counter above the stage still showed 1 million Halo S downloads from launch night. On a new display beside it, Atlas connections passed 2 billion. Below both screens, the old check offered $200 million for everything we had not yet become. I remembered how enormous that offer once looked. Now Tomorrow Foundry's first budget was 50 times larger, and I had approved it with a voice vote before lunch. That afternoon, Lightcore's market value crossed $650 billion. Financial channels argued about whether Atlas would make us the first trillion-dollar technology company. I did not watch for long. Valuation was useful, but a screen could not build the key to 2033. I flew to Meridian with Ethan and Maya. Our aircraft landed beside the runway where Victor once saw that I had reached Harbor Grid first. Thousands of workers filled the fabrication campus. The old wrapped machines were gone. In their place stood clean rooms producing processors for nearly every intelligent device manufacturer in the world. Ethan carried the new cell through the same gate where the former plant director had expected a liquidation buyer. Maya reviewed the expansion plans while walking. I signed the order for a 7th line beneath a display showing orders through the next 3 years. Money moved, concrete would rise, and capacity would exist before the unknown file opened. That was how my power worked now. I no longer waited for a prediction and placed $80 on it. I owned the people, machines, software, roads, cloud, and time required to make my own prediction true. At sunset, Lumen contacted me through the secure device in my pocket. The 2033 file had changed. One line of its encryption had opened after Ethan activated the new cell. The visible text contained only 6 words. Do not let Victor die again. Maya read the line over my shoulder. Ethan stopped walking. Beyond them, Meridian's new production wing reflected the red sky. Victor had destroyed me in one future and failed to control me in another. Saving him was not an objective I would have chosen. The word again suggested a timeline none of us remembered. I felt the old pull of a countdown, but no fear followed it. In 2009, I had $80, a rented garage, and a machine with 30 days of life. I turned those into $40,000 before the market closed, $4 million through technology, a factory before the auction, an operating system before the world expected it, and an empire before my original death arrived. In 2032, I had Lightcore. Whatever came for Victor, Lumen, or the future itself would have to cross an empire built from every company the old world failed to value. I looked at the new fabrication line and told Maya to double Tomorrow Foundry's emergency capacity. She asked how much I was authorizing. I answered with a number that had once sounded impossible, $20 billion. The transfer cleared before our aircraft left Meridian. Somewhere inside Nova Forge, the 2033 file waited for the rest of its key. Somewhere outside Lightcore's network, Victor knew more than he should. And across the world, factories bearing my symbol began preparing for a future that no archive remembered. I had already died bankrupt once. I had no intention of letting the next future belong to anyone else.